Welcome, Gabby, to the Tribeofrunners podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your crazy busy schedule to be on the podcast and for coordinating how the time zones go. As we talked prior, I am not the best with time zones, so I appreciate you doing that for me.
Oh, my pleasure, Liz. Thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yes, yes. I'm excited to dive into the conversation about nutrition and what you do. But before we get to all of that good stuff, tell us a little about yourself outside of the fitness industry and like the nutrition aspect of what you do.
Yeah. So, this is a very good question because I always start with like, okay, so I'm a dietitian, but okay, outside of the fitness, the fitness industry. So, well, I'm a Mexican living in Australia. I came here in 2016 to do a master's degree. I love sport. I'm a triathlete, and recently, sort of transitioning to running.
Okay.
So I've been doing triathlon for 20 years. Before that, it was swimming and a bunch of other sports. So sport has always been something that it's part has been part of my life, and it was through that enjoyment of the sport and through seeing how good it was for me and for the people around me, because I was always part of teams and people who were really active, that I wanted to pursue a path in sport. So that's what took me into exploring avenues into being someone who helps athletes somehow. Originally I wanted to be more in the let's say coaching part, let's say, in terms of being a coach or doing some like, yeah, like something on that side. But
Mhm.
then as I started to look at, let's say, degrees or things like that, I realized that the path that I could see in terms of becoming a running coach or triathlon coach or swimming coach was pretty much going through physical education, at least when I was in high school, which when I was thinking of this. And I didn't love that idea. So when I look at degrees, I saw that the dietetics degree, especially at the university where I did it, had a really heavy component on wellness. And in that
Mhm.
wellness part, there was sports nutrition, there was exercise and health. There were so many things about sport that I love. I was like, okay, cool. So it looks like if I become a sports dietitian, I can be involved in the sport. I can help people from that perspective. And definitely, yeah, absolutely love the idea. And since then, which was easily over 15 years ago, I decided that that was the way to go. So, yeah, definitely been enjoying the whole aspect of a sport. And recently I was listening to a podcast it was like, is this a cult? And I was like, oh dear, it feels like I'm just talking about running the whole day in terms of like what I do, how
Yeah.
I work. So I was like, I hope it's not. But I really enjoy it. That's so
Yeah.
good.
I feel like it's a good cult if it is a cult. But I
Mm.
definitely have heard that conversation too of like, you guys are like all obsessed. That's all you talk about. And it's like, but there's so many different avenues. And like, we'll kind of get into it too, because you don't just deal with runners, which is really, really cool. You have more of like the endurance and you deal with triathlons and such. But it's so cool that you found it at such a young age and then have completely dove in and it, made it such a lifestyle. And I love that, and it's really cool to see what you've done and where you've come from. So it's super super cool. And how long have you lived where you have now?
9 years over
Okay,
here.
very cool. And do you plan to stay there? Do you? I assume you love it there.
Yes, I love it. So yeah, it's definitely so good. I mean, from a lifestyle perspective, it's just incredible. Like, I love that I can just step out of the door and go for a run. If I go for a bike ride, there's water everywhere I go because there's a massive river and obviously the beach. Very peaceful, and yeah, everything is amazing. The only thing that, of course, I find extremely painful is that I am so far from my family. So that's, of course, the only thing that if I could just take Mexico and put it right next to Australia, like literally a road trip away, that would be amazing.
Yes, yes. I'm sure that's very hard to deal with. But what an amazing area to be at and like to grow as an adult and become your own person and have a good lifestyle. So that's amazing and super super cool for you. So when did you mention like fitness and sports have always kind of been in your life? When did that originally start for you?
Ooh, I feel like literally since I was very little. Essentially, uh, I remember since, I mean, I can't remember the exact age, but my parents have always been really keen on me and my siblings. Well, not have, like, were very keen in me and my siblings practicing some physical activity. And I remember since very young age with my brother going to gymnastics and kung fu, and then eventually swimming, which is the one that, let's say, we spent the most time training. So yeah, I can say with confidence, because that's what the name of the pool where we started swimming, the name is 2000, so the year 2000. That's when I started swimming. And yeah, essentially it's been there the whole time. So something that, of course, when you're a kid, it's not something that you're taking as serious. I think it was with swimming that I started to see more the seriousness of it, let's say, especially
Mm.
because with that, the pool, it was the first one in the city, like the first big pool. And there was the idea of establishing a team, and of course the excitement of wanting to be part of the team. So that's when I started to see how, beyond being on my, let's say, schedule of going during the week and having fun with my friends, there was other things involved. Like, even I remember at that stage looking at the Olympics and things like that, that it was quite exciting. So yeah, essentially I would say pretty much all my life that's been a really big part of it.
That's awesome. So you've literally been swimming since you're like a little girl, which is amazing. And then you mentioned you're a triathlete. So when did the biking and the running all pick up?
So we were still swimming, and a cousin found out about a triathlon that was happening in the city. It was a really new and local triathlon, and because my siblings and I and my cousins were swimmers, and then dad was cycling, and we had cousins who run. We were like, oh, let's do a relay. So we organized several relays across the family. So I think we had like 4 different teams, and it was really exciting because, of course, we were racing against each other. But I remember that day we finished that, and I was like, this is incredible. Like, I didn't even know this thing existed. And I enjoy it so much that I wanted to essentially wait till next year for the next triathlon and do it on my own. And that's how it started. It was like, okay, next year I really want to do this on my own. My preparation was literally just keep swimming, and a week before the triathlon, let's make sure I go around the block on the bike just to make sure I don't fall. And that was it. That's the training for it. It was a very short triathlon, but crossing that finish line, and it was just a so different experience compared to the swim competitions I had. This felt so different, and I felt like this is where I belong. I really like this. So from there, I was, I think, like 15 years old. It was quite, like, I mean, I'm 35 now, so essentially 20 years ago. And it was like, okay, I love this. But then, because there was not a lot of, like, let's say, there were no clubs or anything for training. So all I kept doing was, I'm just going to keep swimming, then eventually going to the gym and things like that. And I think it was not until I was 18, 19 that I moved to study at university. And that's where I started to be involved with more people who enjoy triathlon. We actually started the university triathlon club, and that's when things started to be more consistent in terms of swimming, cycling, running, and getting a little bit more of a structure behind it.
Yes, that's incredible. And such a young age. I'm so impressed. Like when I was that age, I did play sports, but like I hated running and I never wanted to do anything more than like just go to practices. I mean, don't get me wrong, like we'd have sport or we would play a few sports like outside of actual organized practices, but nothing too crazy. So I find that super amazing that you're out there doing that at such a young age.
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I think something that helped a lot was that there was never pressure. So, for
Mm.
example, I know of, I mean, I see some very young athletes, and because there's a lot of pressure in terms of, like, you have to perform well, and there's like so many hours of training that eventually you just burn out. And I feel like in my case, it was always enjoyable. It was always something that is like, this is good for me, this is good for my body. And I'm very grateful to my parents for being like that, in terms of,
Mm.
look, this is amazing for you. I seriously don't care where you place in that competition. Is the fact that you are showing up day in, day out, and being here, and being more responsible, and all the other things that sport was helping me to do. It's the part that I feel like allow me to continue on for essentially, I mean, of course, I've taken breaks where, let's say, a couple of weeks, that if I'm injured or sick or whatever, but I would say I haven't, like, officially been, like, not training since
That's
then,
incredible.
essentially.
That is awesome, and it truly shows, like, what you, not to say like dealt with, but like were in when you were younger, because there's no pressure. Like you said, there's no pressure. Of course, you're going to love what you're doing because you can literally go in, have fun, not do so well and come out and be okay, or do really well and have such a good high off of that. I love that your family and everything kind of laid out like that for you, because look at you. You have such an amazing background of tons of activities and tons of sports. And I'm sure you've grown so much as an athlete just from that.
Oh, absolutely. I think for me, the part that I love the most is the people I get to cross paths with. Ever since I was in the swimming team, and then actually in high school, I did a little bit of volleyball and then triathlon at university. When I think of who were my best friends, who were the people I connected with the most, was always my teammates. That those were my tribe. And
Mhm.
it was just incredible. And I think now that I get to work with people like that, that's like I have I enjoy the conversations I have every single day because everybody I work with are people who are so interesting, and I definitely we click. And it just, I think, as much as of course sport is good for me as an individual, when I look at the collective part of it, it's just incredible as well.
Oh, for sure. And I completely can relate with that. Like I had tons of friends in high school and um didn't play sports in college, but when I was in high school, like they were my closest friends, everyone on my team, and then grew up, got older and was like, "Oh, like I don't have that same connection. You know, I'm missing someone or something." And then met the ultra community and I'm just a runner and fell in love with everyone and finally feel like, "Huh, like these are my people. I get it now. Like I have that close relationship." And it's just I think we all kind of suffer together, even at a young age. I hate to say we suffer, but we go through so much in that sport together. And when we get older, we're doing things kind of solely, but we still have that understanding. Like you look to the person beside you, and you're still having that like they're pushing just like I'm pushing. We're suffering together, and it's just that great community, great tribe that we get to be around, and it's amazing.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm sure you have experienced this because I, my favorite chats with, let's say, my friends are almost like at the end of a race where we're just sharing the war stories and what you came across throughout the thing. And I'm sure that you guys are talking about like, oh yeah, and like suddenly I started to see these things in the,
Oh
in the
yes.
middle of the night, and like it is so good and it's so energized. Like, and are people who understand you, of course.
Mhm. Yeah, it's I always say we're all crazy and we're like everyone in this fitness industry or endurance world, like we're all real crazy, but we all get along because we all know we do these crazy things. And so not in a bad way, but we like to push ourselves mentally and we all understand that. And so we have these crazy stories to talk about, which is so cool. So cool. So the triathlon, when did you kind of mentioned you're kind of getting into running more. When did that peak? When did that start for you?
So I moved over here, obviously, and essentially, yes, I kept doing triathlon. I pretty much knew where, like, that the university had a triathlon club before knowing what the university was and where it was. Like, I knew I was like, okay, triathlon is my thing. I really need to make sure that this university I'm heading to is also like going to allow me to keep it training.
Mhm.
And I essentially every year I've been doing a half Ironman since then. Well, since 2017, which is when I did my first half Ironman. This was after almost 10 years of doing triathlon. That's when I was like, okay, I guess I should experience this longer distance. And I think the shift towards running started last year.
Okay.
So actually, in 2023, I ran my second marathon after 10 years of not doing a marathon.
Okay.
And I really enjoy that. And I think what I enjoy a lot about that is that recently my life has been busier, and triathlon training is really time consuming in terms of, okay, you have to go swimming, you have to go cycling, running. And then on top of that, I was already doing a strength training sessions.
Mm.
So it was a lot of time dedicated to it. And when I trained for the marathon, uh, the let's say the time investment was less. Now, something I did say when I finished that marathon was because I wrote a reflection on it, and I said training for a marathon is easier than training for a triathlon, but racing a marathon is harder than racing a triathlon. It was just amazing. Like because it had been 10 years since the last time I did one, and I
Mhm.
totally, I wouldn't say I forgot about it, but like reliving that, it was, yeah, it was amazing. So I really enjoyed, let's say that there was a little bit more balance. And the fact that I would say 99.9% of the clients I work with right now are runners and ultra runners.
Mm, okay.
So I really want to experience that part as well. Like, okay, I know that I have the experience of endurance and of course being in triathlon and doing long races and the training and everything, but I haven't experienced the part of let's go for a really, really long run in a race. So I
Mhm.
really want to see what that is like. And yeah, essentially that's part of why it started. I also, because I know you said I hated running, I wouldn't say I hated it, but definitely when I started triathlon, oh my god, it was the hardest part. It was so hard.
Mhm.
The whole time just like gasping for air, my
Mm.
everything was in pain. I remember being so proud of myself when I finally ran 5 kilometers without stopping. I just
Ooh,
couldn't, like, it was like the first big milestone.
mhm.
And now, after 20 years of doing this, running has been the most enjoyable one. I actually, of course, it helps that you start getting better and better. I'm
Mhm.
not a good runner in terms of like, if I go into a run race, I'm not going to be anywhere at the top. But definitely in the triathlon part, running was becoming my strongest leg. It
Ooh.
was, you normally get the results and it tells you per leg where you place and how you went, and running was becoming the one where I was doing better. So that's why part, like, I also decided to explore it. It's like, okay, what happens if I spend a little bit more of my energy running and trying to be better at it, and see how that goes.
I love that. That's super, super cool. So my next question, what's the furthest distance you think you want to go?
Oh, that's such a good one. At this stage, I do like the idea of doing 100K. uh,
Okay.
at the moment I've done, like, essentially a marathon is the longest race I've
Okay.
done.
Okay.
So I really want to at least start with a 50K. This year, because I think I'm very conservative in how I approach things. Like, for example, it took me 10 years from doing triathlon to actually decide to do a half marathon. I
Mhm.
don't want to do the same with running because it will be like in 20 years I'll do my first. But this year I registered for a 28K because I know that, obviously, I mean, 28K trail. So
Yes.
I just want to experience that part of, like, okay, this is obviously more technical, going uphill and
Yes.
things that
Yes.
with
Yes.
triathlon I'm not so used to. So that's a starting point. I also have a little bit of peer pressure, let's say, because uh, a lot of the clients I work with are actually backyard ultra runners. And
Mm.
recently, I was in another podcast, the Backyard Ultra podcast, and
Mhm.
it's the second time that the host asked me, when are you going to do a backyard?
Yeah.
And this time I said, like, okay, I'm going to do it next year. So
Oh,
2026 is when I'm finally going to do a backyard ultra.
very
I
cool.
have no idea how far I want to go, but I like uh the race format is quite, I guess, intriguing in terms of, obviously, very different to a point to point ultra. So yeah, I'm definitely keen to explore. Before saying all these distances, I think different race formats could be quite interesting to try.
For sure. I love that you're doing a 28K on trail. Like, so many people just jump straight into ultras and they have no clue about being on trail. You know what I mean? And it's completely different, especially if you've been on the road your whole life. So I love that you're doing that. That's like a good preparation for like what you're getting into. And I do love the backyard ultra. I have to say, I've never actually ran one. I am thinking about doing one the end of this year, but the format is amazing because like you will genuinely be able to see what you can do because it's a 4 point something mile loop and you have an hour to complete it. And at the end of the day, if you get done quick enough, like you could continue to go for potentially a very, very long time and get a PR and just crush this race. So I'm super excited for you to do one next year.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited too. So should be a good one. Definitely looking forward to it.
Yes, I can imagine. Do you think you'll do another maybe trail race before that, or will you go from the 28K to the backyard ultra?
I want to see how this one goes first. So depending on how the 28K goes, I probably would like to do definitely more. I think, I mean, here as where I live, literally is pretty much there's trail races almost every weekend. So opportunities there are plenty, and especially different distances. So I think the opportunity to do another one, even if it's shorter than the 28K, is right there. Depending on where I'm at in December, there's I'm saying because I may go to Mexico, but if I'm here, there is a 47K that I've heard is not too technical, which is quite
Okay.
enticing to me. I was like, okay, cool. So I may consider, like, I think it makes sense if 28K goes well, potentially by December transitioning to that could be a good uh, build, let's say.
Yeah.
You're the coach, you can tell me if it's
Yes,
not too
no, I think it's
crazy.
fantastic.
Uh, yeah, so yeah, like I think that's likely the case. And then the backyard ultra I'm considering is one that happens in March. So actually we have it's like 3 weeks away at the moment. Here
Wow.
it's
Okay.
huge where I live. So yeah, I'm thinking that next year March is when I will do my debut in the backyard ultra space.
Yes, I love it, and that sounds like a wonderful setup, so I highly encourage it, and like you said, it's definitely not, taking your time, but it's also not, like, getting in there and going real quick, real fast, and potentially, not end up not loving it or it getting injured, of course, so that's something we never wanna encourage. But it sounds like you have an amazing year-ish into the ultra world, so I'm super pumped for you. But enough about running for the time being, we might get back into it. I can't help it, I always talk about running. But tell us, like, what you do for yourself, like what your business is, and let's kind of get into nutrition.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a dietitian, a sports nutritionist, and the founder of Intensive Fit. And I enable endurance athletes to overcome lack of energy and gut upset, so they can fuel their bodies with purpose, train with confidence, and rise to their full potential. And essentially, it's been 10 years of me working with endurance athletes, and recently more and more with ultra endurance
Mm.
athletes, which is pretty much 90% of the people I work with are definitely in the ultra space, whether it is because they are doing an Ironman or most of them backyard ultra, 100 miler, 200 miler, or even crazier things. So that's been me for the last, let's say, at least 5 years. And yeah, essentially it's working on that fuel component is in, if, I mean, most all the people I work with are people who are so committed to the sport, to their training. They don't need motivation to go out and do their training session. What they need is the fuel to support that training session to go really well. So that's where I come in. That's where it's okay, how can we make sure that every minute you are already spending training is paying off? That this is really good quality. And of course, by the time you show up to race day, you have the strategy to make sure that it goes well, that you can complete your 100K, 100 miler, or whatever challenge you have ahead of you with plenty of energy, without gut issues, and crossing that finish line with a big smile because everything worked exactly as you were expecting and as hard as you worked for months before this race.
Very cool. And I love that. And I love that it's more than just like the right, not to say like right amount, but like your energy purpose and gut reasons. Because like I have heard from so many people, from athletes and friends, like, oh, my stomach's upset, but I just continue eating. Or like, I'm bonking at this. Like people don't realize what fuel could do for them. So I, love what you do. And it's super, super encouraging to know. And I have tons of questions, and I do have some questions from the audience. I asked some of my audience to give some questions, which we'll get into, but some questions like I personally want to know just from like what I've seen on your content and stuff. Like, like what would you say is the biggest thing you deal with when you get an athlete coming to you, whether they're ultra runners or a triathlon? Like, what's the biggest problem? I hate to say, but that you see.
I think the biggest problem that I see, which is different to the problem the person is seeing, is
Mm.
a lot of people miss that. I say the part in the middle. So when I talk about the part in the middle, I always describe the training process because to me, understanding that and then where nutrition comes to play is where it makes it easier for people to make everything click and what essentially I recommend. So if we think of training, we have training, which is that training stimuli, which is telling our body that we need to have the training adaptation. Something needs to change, something needs to be better for us to eventually have that better performance. That literally is why we do and do. I mean, obviously, I'm not telling this to you, I'm telling it to the audience to understand
Yes,
because I
yes.
know you understand this extremely well, which is without that training session, we won't get the transformation. So when I talk about the middle part, is that people are aware of course, I need training, but the middle part is the training adaptation. And often the nutrition supporting that part is 100% lacking, is just going out on fasted runs because it's easier and they don't have the time and they don't want to have issues with their gut. Then because everybody are busy, they usually go for the training session and then get on with the day, forget about eating afterwards, and then later at the during the week not understanding why they are crashing because they don't have the energy, why they are always cranky, why they're actually having experiencing frequent injuries. And the thing is that that part in the middle, which is how are we supporting your nutrition around your training sessions and essentially throughout the whole week, is something that for most people is lacking. So that is a problem. I would say almost everyone who comes to see me are already like essentially ignoring. When people come to see me, most of the problems that, let's say, the biggest ones are either there's been gut issues, so they had a race that didn't go well because essentially they couldn't stomach the food, they were having issues all throughout. They often actually had like several people who ended up with a DNF because they just couldn't keep going. There was no way they had the energy. Like essentially the nutrition was the thing that got in their way. So that's one. Or the other one, which is I am frustrated at not seeing the result. Like I feel flat throughout the race. I don't understand what's going on. How is it possible that I'm training so hard and by the time I show up to this race, I'm not performing as best as I should or as I know I could. So those are, let's say, the main things I see. And of course, because the way I work with my clients is, let's say, it's not just okay, so this is a problem, let's just fix this thing that you're talking about. Is let's look at the whole journey. Literally, if we're talking about your training sessions and you having the energy, and especially that part where I see there's missing that middle part of let's enable those adaptations in really good quality and with the right fuel. So we look at all that, and of course is focusing on, for most people, the biggest thing they want to see is that race they are preparing for, that specific performance they are seeking, to see it there. And that's, let's say, that's the outcome that we're expecting. But from the whole journey is looking every step of the way how things are improving as well.
Yes, I can only imagine. And this is kind of like a random side note, but do you experience a lot of people not fueling around a run as an issue, or you know what I mean? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, look, like you mean as like some people coming and not essentially paying attention to what they are eating around training? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so like they're dealing with, like you'd mentioned, like crashing midweek or injury or all of that, and they think they're doing the right thing, but in reality they're not fueling correctly.
Oh yeah, 100%. That's probably that would I would say is the most common
Mm,
thing, essentially. And I think it's because I mean there are many reasons. One is for someone who is like, I'm just very busy. I don't have time to eat in the morning. I'm just
mm,
going to go and do it. Other times is deliberate. Sometimes, I mean, like if we look around, there's still a really strong uh, path, or let's say a school of thought promoting faster training as the way to go to make you more fat adapted and all these things that we can get into further detail if you want to. But essentially what that's saying is like, hey, making things harder for you is better for your body, which in reality is not. Yes, for example, training, which is that stimuli, yeah, we
mhm.
want to have that, let's say, stimulate the body. So that's why we do things. If we are always running at the same pace, we won't see the difference, right? Depending on what we're expecting. Or if we're, let's say, if every time I'm doing my training, I'm always just doing 5K, very aerobic, and actually always at the same pace, even though I'm improving, if I'm staying at that pace, it's no longer something that my body is feeling stimulated. Versus now I actually, okay, I'm going to always sprint the 5K and I'm also going to not eat and I'm going to make sure. I mean, I've seen people like I've seen recently some social media posts of someone who's like, so I'm going to do this 24-hour challenge where I'm not going to eat in 24 hours and I'm going to complete as many miles as I can. It's like, what for? Like,
Yes.
what exactly is the point of this?
Mm,
I mean, yeah, I think it's way more impressive to say, I'm going to do 24 hours and I'm going to do them as best as I can to see how much distance I cover with the right support, the right fuel, and everything. That's way better than saying, like, I'm just essentially sacrificing and punishing my body all the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that definitely there are different. I would say for most people is the first one. For most people is I was just not aware that this was important. I always thought that as long as training was done, that was it. So yeah.
Yeah, that's I can only imagine it. I encounter it quite a bit where they're like, "Well, I run fasted," and I'm like, okay." So like working around that and then finding out like they're and nothing against it. We all have busy lives, like you mentioned, but finding out their like home nutrition is not well, and it's like, like you could gain so much as an athlete if you just could dial your nutrition in. Mind you, I do not know everything. I know very very little, but I think it's awesome that you'd mentioned, and I'm sure you kind of mean this, but like you hear these random things on social media, like all these fad diets, all of these like trendy things. And at the end of the day, like you just need to have a good lifestyle with nutrition, like where you're consistently eating healthy things, as best as you can, because we're human and not everyone can do, not everyone can manage it, like people having children or, do also having like a crazy busy life. But what would you say is your like biggest advice to anyone in the endurance world that is struggling with nutrition and want to, get the best word of advice that you could give them?
Mm. I think it's very close to what you literally just described, which is absolutely spot on in terms of understanding. We all have different circumstances, we all have different kinds of lives. And when we are expecting to for everybody to eat exactly the same way because this is the way, it's just impossible. Like for some people it's going to work extremely well, and those are the case studies we see that is like, look at this person shining, and then we want everybody to do it. So my best piece of advice is actually, I would say, a mindset shift in terms of how are we looking at nutrition. And this is very much my mantra every time I talk about nutrition, which is fuel with purpose. And
Mhm.
what that means is, what do you want to achieve and how can we make sure that nutrition is delivering that? Most of the time when we think about eating well, or I want to approach nutrition and be better for my running and I want to be good with my food, the very first thing that most people focus on, and I know that in my journey I was the same, is okay, I should stop having chocolate, or I need to stop having sweets, or I need to stop, like whatever is for most people. We have the thing that pops into our head as like, oh, this is the guilty pleasure, I should stop this.
Mhm.
That's the first approach. We start thinking of, I need to be good and I'm going to cut this. And the problem with that line of thinking and behavior is that all we're doing is actually depriving our body from more energy, restricting more, and essentially seeing food as the problem.
Mhm.
Whereas when we look at fuel with purpose, we're seeing food as the enabler. Food is here to make sure that training goes better. Food is here to support your recovery. Food is here to help you go through that race with lots of joy and making sure that you cross that finish line. Of course, there are things in that, let's say, approach where we are focusing on, let's say, the things that are going to give you that the most. And when we do that, it's easier to, the things that are not, let's say, as health conducive, to stay out of the way, because now you're focusing on what needs to be on your plate, that you are not going to be like, oh, okay, and I'm going to also going to put this fry thing here, because your plate's already full, you already have the things that need to be there. So you notice how, well, for most of the people I work with, that relationship with food gets better. It's a stronger, it's something that now we see that food as the ally, as the asset that is right in
Mhm.
front of us.
Oh, I love that. And I love doing it with a purpose. I think that's how like I've approached a lot of nutrition for myself personally is I used to be big into lifting. And so I was always like, well, I want to get bigger. I want to get stronger. I need to eat the fuel. And that was my purpose. Like the food is my fuel. So I need to eat it, and that's how I think I've gotten to the weird lifestyle that I have with food. And it's pretty decent, I think. And probably not the best, but I know like everyone always asks me, well, what's your diet? And I'm like, I don't have a diet, I have a lifestyle. And I've always said that, and it's just like that's my purpose, as I like I'd mentioned, like I use the food as my fuel, and not in the sense of like that looks, I don't even know, I don't, but I had always done that. And I very fortunate because when I got into this endurance world and started running, like now I'm always thinking like, what can I eat to get me further? Like for my 200, I ate a lot compared to what I did to when I ran my 50 miler, and it's just completely different. But it was always that thought of like that fuel, using that fuel, the food as fuel to get me to where I need to be.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's massive, right? Because I'm sure you have noticed it and think about it, but often, for most of us, we don't see that. Like, and the thing is that literally last night I was scrolling Instagram, and there were like, I don't even know how the algorithm started to think that I was interested in this kind of content, but it's like how I'm eating so I can lose this much, and then it's like I cut out this, I made it like, and it's like, hang on, like, what is the purpose? Yes, for someone who's looking at, let's say, aesthetic purposes or whatever, it's going to be different than someone who has the interest in having a really good performance and a result.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And I know I kind of said it before and you said it too, like social media will get you sometimes, and the stuff that you see, it's really crazy. I have a friend and he was telling me like, yeah, every fad right now is like different and it depends on like where you're at and where, like what industry you're in the sense of like fitness. So like if you're in, because high rocks is really big right now, so like you see so much high rock stuff and then they're trying to eat certain things and it is wild, and I'm sure you deal with tons of it. So I it is a hard job, I'm sure, that you do. So I appreciate all the help that you do and all of the social media. Your social media is amazing. You truly give out so much good knowledge and you really explain things. I've been like diving deep into it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this stuff is great. So I truly appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad it's helpful. And yeah, thank you. Because I think, I mean, what I find the most frustrating about social media, and I don't know if you like, probably, I mean, you're literally saying the same, which is that experience of, unfortunately, if you want to, let's say, be more popular, you have to be very radical. And it's
Mhm.
impossible to be like that when you are promoting a good fueling advice, because the thing is that, and I'm sure that once we get into questions that are more specific about which is the best energy gel, like things like that, my answer almost always starts with it depends,
Yeah.
and then we move about like depending on like whether you are this or this, these are the options. And of course in social media, when you try to do that, like, oh, so if you're trying to do this, try this. No, what works is me saying this is the one that is going to make the change for you, and this is if you are not consuming this energy gel, you are absolutely lost. And of course that that video is going to get way more views and shares and everything than me saying, okay, this is how we choose the best one. But the thing is that I'm there for that, like for people to see that, okay, actually I did try the one that they told me and it didn't work for me. So I'm willing to listen and see how I can find the best one for me. So even though, let's say, it's not volume, it definitely is good quality in terms of people who are ready for that message.
Yes, and I love that. Quality over the quantity all day long. I'm so there for that, and especially as a coach. And we've kind of, I know one of the questions in here is kind of about it because like you get things that kind of spark interest, and especially coaching and nutrition, and it's like that thing's working for someone, and it is really working. It's doing amazing, but their quantity is huge, and they're reaching so many people, and then it's like everyone is trying to do what he's or she's doing, and then you're trying to like settle the craziness and be like, it's not everybody is the same. So many people are so different, and that's in training and in everyone's fitness, and I can only imagine in everyone's stomach and what actually works for each person. So I can only imagine. And since we're on the topic, let's get into some of these questions, because one of the questions literally is, well, I guess it's more personal for you, but it says, "What is the best gel for you and why?"
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, that's a good question, because in that case, I don't
Yeah,
say it depends, because it's actually for
for
me.
you. Yes.
My favorite energy gel for me as an athlete is Morten. So I really like the texture. And okay, so this is why I like it. I like the texture. I like that gel consistency. I find it way easier for me to consume it. Uh, I've usually for my triathlons, I used to, let's say, get to the run part, and despite of how much I was training with energy gels, usually the last one, the very last one I was planning to consume, I will never get to it because it was just a struggle at that point.
Mhm.
And with these energy gels, I've never had that issue. Like, it's really easy for me to have them. I also like that, for example, the caffeinated version, which is something I do work with. It has 100 milligrams, which for me works well. So that is why this one is my favorite, but as a dietitian, it's not the favorite. There are others that is depending on, for example, I work with people who say, I hate that energy gel because of the texture, which is the thing I like the most. So a lot of
Oh.
people say, that is really off-putting. It's like that jelly texture. It feels very weird for some people. So it definitely depends on what is your taste like. But I do say that, at least in my case, it's something that I find way more enjoyable, especially if that particular gel is, let's say, cold. It's even easier to eat it. So I find that it's a good one. I really enjoy it.
Very cool, very cool. Now I have to ask, and I know what you're gonna say, but what is a gel that you would recommend for people?
So I would say depends, and
Yeah.
there's like, for example, if it's the part of the flavor, and especially people who have a struggle with, let's say, the stickiness of the the very first energy gels, and I think that most people will had their first experience, especially if you've been in the sport for quite some time, where the goo, which is like gu one, and that's like the texture is really sticky, very thick.
Mhm.
Back then there was no option, so it's like, well, you just put up with it. But for some people, when you have that as their first experience, it's like, I seriously can't eat energy gels because I just can't with that. So if texture is a concern, I do suggest Morten as one option, or for example, SIS, which is another brand that's more runny, so that is more liquidy. And if not, Precision has a new energy gel that is also, well, it's not as new, but anyway, it's also a bit more runny.
Okay.
If that's, let's say, one, also the other thing will be the flavor. So for example, Morton and Precision, they are just neutral, they are, let's say, just sugary.
Mhm.
Then there are others, for example, Goo has birthday cake and
Yeah.
vanilla, French vanilla, like
Mhm.
many different things that some people would like. Now, something that when I see people recommending energy gels, a lot of people start by the ingredients. And
Mhm.
the reason I don't is because I prefer you having an enjoyable experience with this energy gel than looking at like, oh, this has multiple transportable carbohydrates and things like that. However, I do need to mention it because if we're looking at someone who is trying to consume over 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, in that case, yes, we need to look at the ingredients to make sure that that's a gel that is going to be easy to absorb.
Mhm.
So, for example, Morten, Precision, and those are the only two I have in my head right now. They
Okay.
do have that composition where you can eat more than 60 grams an hour. So what we want to look at there is just that it has glucose and fructose, or maltodextrin and fructose in the ingredients, and ideally saying that is a 2-to-1 ratio of carbs, of glucose to fructose. So I know I'm getting very technical, and that's why I
Yeah.
hate talking about that, because people are like, hang on, you lost me at the ratio thing.
Uh,
But that's why I prefer starting. What is your experience with energy gels? And based on that, is okay, let's explore what other options based on your flavor, preference, and texture, and even eventually to the logistics of the race. Because, for example, there are some brands that, as much as they are great in terms of flavor, they are giving you 20 grams of carbohydrate per energy gel. And there are others that are 40. And for example, Precision has the jumbo one, which is 90 grams.
Mhm. Mhm.
So if you don't have options to carry, in some instances, it's like, well, looks like this is the one. Or for example, if you are not going to have a crew or access to drop bags, and the race organizers only have this particular brand, it's like, well, let's train with it because it looks like you are going to need to rely on these energy gels as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you go over the texture thing because it is such a big thing for so many runners where texture and flavor, and they have issues with that. So I love that. And I hate to do this to you, but do you want to dive in a little before I go back to the questions on the 60 grams per hour and how our body can consume that?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, please don't no, don't hate it. I think it's important to talk about that because
For sure.
yeah, it's something that is, let's say, how our body works. So for many years ago, 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour was the recommendation.
Mhm.
The reason being is that our gut is able to absorb 1 gram of glucose per hour. Sorry, per minute, 1 gram per minute. So, of course, 60 minutes in 1 hour, 60 grams. Then later, it was discovered that fructose, our body also can absorb at a rate of 0.5 grams of fructose per minute. So what that means is that, okay, we have 60 grams that we can absorb from glucose. There's another 30 that we can absorb from fructose. So now we're getting at 90 grams an hour. And recently, people are exploring almost a 1-to-1. So it means 1 gram glucose, 1 gram fructose. And that's how some athletes we're seeing they are getting to 120 grams an hour. Let's say more evidence on the 1 to 0.8, which is closer to 100 grams an hour in that case.
Okay.
So the reason why it's important is, for example, if someone wants to, let's say, oh, I only want to have natural things and I don't want to have the products and the processed foods. In that case, fair enough, but I would say it's way safer to stay under the 60 grams an hour, because establishing that glucose fructose ratio is really hard with just food. And of course, if we want to go over 60 grams from food, as literally eating sandwiches and having bananas and things like that, is very difficult, because most of these things are going to be solid and breaking it down is going to be hard. And that's when the likelihood of gut upset can increase. If the person does not have any issues with, let's say, using products or things that are designed for this, then in that case, if we are exploring over 60 grams, we need to start paying attention to these ratios, because if we're expecting to get everything from just glucose, then the problem starts, because the body can't absorb that at the rate we're consuming it. So it means that we need to start adding the fructose to make it, to enable that extra absorption, let's say.
Yes, I love that. And thank you so much for explaining. I know you know this, but this ultra world right now is going crazy with the one athlete, David Roach, who's out there doing all of these crazy calorie intake or carb intakes. And no one ever really explains the why and like why he's doing it and if it's okay. They just kind of say like, oh, it's the new science. And you do have to do a lot of research. I've personally like done some digging and went into there, but it's so great to hear someone explain it and in a very easy, understandable way. It was not, you did not explain it super difficult. So I appreciate that. And that actually kind of dives into one of the questions is David Roach's style of high carbing like a smart way for fueling?
So the next thing we need to understand to answer that question is, why are we having carbohydrates? Like, what is the whole point of the energy gels and the sports drink and all these things? So essentially, our body, when we are moving, is predominantly using two fuel tanks, let's say. So one is our carbohydrate, and the second one is our fat. The thing is that the higher the intensity at which we're moving, the harder, or like the harder we're pushing, the more carbohydrate our body is going to use. Why? Because that is the premium fuel. That is the fuel that is really easy and quick to use. So it means that if we are expecting to, let's say, do a marathon or something, and we're pushing for that personal record, very likely a lot of what we're using is going to be that carbohydrate. So, for example, if we think of when someone, so actually, before I move there, so we have the carbohydrate, the fat. Now, where we are getting that carbohydrate, one big part is our glycogen, which is, let's say, the carbohydrate fuel tank, which is where our carbohydrate is stored. And that is something that that's why we need to do a carb loading before a race. So we have that tank full. And essentially that's one, and also from the blood glucose circulating in our body. So if we think about hitting a wall, essentially what happens is that we pretty much are very low in carbohydrate, or almost empty on carbs, and we hit the wall because the body doesn't have an option but to slow down. Essentially, the fat is still there. Even for the leanest athletes, there's still plenty of fat for us to keep moving. But the problem is that we need to move way slower because it's not as efficient. So if we're, let's say, slowing down, then yes, we can use the fat. Now, here's where the energy gels, the sports drinks, and what we are eating during the race or even training session becomes important. The role of those products or foods is to give us extra glucose in our system. So that means that our body continues to have carbohydrate available to use as quick energy. Now, okay, so now that we know that is, okay, need carbohydrates for higher intensity. If we look at David Roche, if we look at Tour de France cyclists, if we look at Kipchoge as well, they are there. They are consuming 120 grams of carbs per hour. But if we think about them, they are going really, really hard. Like they are literally running this 100-miler. In the case of David, he's sprinting through the whole thing, essentially.
Yes.
He's pushing very hard. So at that level, what he's essentially looking at is, okay, if one of the reasons we can't push hard for so long is because of the fuel not being available, let's make sure that that fuel continues to be available. So that's why he's pushing for that high carb intake, so that way his body has the tools to keep pushing. So in situations like that, definitely pushing for more carbohydrate is going to be helpful. But things to be aware of is, even though we have, let's say, the glucose fructose, if we head out on training sessions fasted, if we consume 30 grams of carbohydrate an hour every time we train, expecting that doing 4 times that in a race is going to go well is absolutely disaster. So that's why the training the gut. I know David even talks about how he went to study competitive eaters in terms of like getting his stomach comfortable tolerating so much food. So yeah, absolutely, it can work. But I would say for anyone listening and thinking like, oh, maybe I should have more carbs, maybe, but let's start where you are at. So if right now, let's say you are at, I'm eating 1 energy gel per hour, or I'm drinking this sports drink per hour, all right, based on what you have, let's maybe go up by 10 grams, assuming at that stage you are very comfortable and consistent, before we explore the really high carb intakes that I've seen it going wrong so many times, especially with, let's say, competitive athletes, where they are like, well, this is what the elites are doing. I want to race really well. Yes, they are pushing really hard, but the way they are implementing this is not ideal. So all we end up with is like literally lots of essentially gut issues, throwing up, like I don't want to get very graphic, but it definitely gets quite disastrous.
Oh yeah.
Because there was no methodology behind implementing this.
Yes, and I love exactly how you said it. And it's so true, because I have experienced it firsthand with so many people being like, "Well, all these, all these people are doing it. I want to do it too." And I'm like, "But you're not there yet. We could potentially get there, but you have to, like you said, you have to train your stomach, and you have to figure out if it's something you can handle." I've personally experienced it myself, where I went from eating lower carbs to wanting to up it a little more, because I knew I was going to be pushing and, finding out what works best for me. And I love that's, you got to start from where you are and then slowly work up, and not just completely dive into, oh, well, they're doing it, let me do it too.
Yeah, exactly. And something I just thought of, because I think it's a really good way of explaining it and hopefully helping people understand, is that it's almost like seeing, let's say, David Roach. I honestly don't know what pace he's running, but let's assume he's doing, I'm sorry, my distances are in kilometers, but let's say he's doing 5 minutes per K. And it's like, okay, so it looks like I need to run at 5 minutes per K. It's like, hang on, actually, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
It's like, looks like if I run at this pace, I'm going to make it. It's the same as if, like, looks like if I eat this much carbs, I'm going to get there.
Yes.
Yes, but it's like, how do we get you to do that? That is the story, right? Like, that is how, like, we need to do the training to first allow your body to sustain that pace for that long. Same story for allowing your body to consume that much carbohydrate.
Yes. I think that's an amazing explanation, because so many people are like you said, they want to get faster, or they want to run at the X speed and or mileage per hour. And you're like, well, we can't just jump from A to B. You have to work there slowly. And it involves, certain block training and, whatever the case may be, but it doesn't go night and day. I mean, nothing in this endurance world goes night and day. It takes time.
Exactly.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Well, I appreciate all of that. So let's dive into some more questions. Best food option to build lean muscle as a vegetarian?
Ooh. So, not that there is the best, but of course, if we are, let's say, in a stage where we're looking at developing muscle mass, one thing that most people focus on is protein, because of course protein is the structural element for that. But we need to be aware that if we want to build, and also I'm sure that because you went through that, let's say, fitness era as well, of like building muscle mass,
Yes.
is that actually carbohydrates are also important, because we need extra energy. And that's something that if we're seriously focusing on I want to build muscle, we do need that calorie surplus. We need to have more energy so that way our body can use it to build that muscle. And what that means for most people, if we're, let's say, focusing 100% of I want to build, is that the likelihood of increasing fat is also going to be there, because we need to support the body with that extra. Now, in the case of if I'm assuming this is a runner, and let's say it's not necessarily I want to get bigger, I just want to support my muscles,
Mm-hmm.
it's different, because first I'm assuming that the training is designed specifically for that. The way we're lifting weights in that situation is very different than the way we're lifting weights for developing muscle mass per se.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, yes, protein is definitely crucial. For a vegetarian athlete, one of the best ones, of course, is going to be legumes. So beans, chickpeas, they are amazing for giving you protein. And especially if you're a runner, they are also giving you carbs, which is great, because it means that it's a really good way of getting extra energy. Often I've heard of people who say, I became vegetarian and essentially started to run better. And I would say one of the main reasons is because by becoming vegetarian, especially if you're focusing on eating well, you are increasing your carbohydrate intake quite drastically anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very helpful. But anyway, in this case, so one is definitely the legumes. Being vegetarian and not vegan means that we can also rely on dairy, which is also really helpful for protein. So milk, Greek yogurt, even cheese or cottage cheese as well, which is really helpful in high in protein. And more than this is the food, is about the composition. So if, let's say, yes, we have the legumes, but like we were saying, we're heading to training and we're not focusing on that recovery, or we are not distributing these throughout the day evenly, it's really hard. So it's, yes, let's make sure that there's sufficient protein in the diet, but also sufficient energy. That's the key. So without energy, the body is essentially, doesn't matter how much protein you supply, if the energy is not there, it's going to be really hard for the body to sustain that.
Yes, and I love that. I love that you explain that too, in the sense of like it needs the energy. Because a lot of people are like, well, I eat carbs, but I guarantee you they don't really know why. They think it like, I don't even know. I just needed to get big, more or less, but it's truly doing work with the other food that you're eating in you or eating and having in you. And yeah, that's awesome. I love that explanation. So yes, amazing, amazing. Another question for you. What is recommended to consume before runs?
So before a run, and this goes back to where I was talking about, like, okay, we're using carbohydrates. So for most runs, the nutrient that is going to be the most beneficial is going to be carbohydrate. Now, depending on what type of run we're doing, is going to be the ideal food for it. So when I look at nutrition for before a training session, there are three things that I like looking at. One is the intensity of that run. The second one is the duration. And the third one, which is crucial for the individual, is how long between you eating and running you have. Because, for example, if I say, oh, intensity and duration, and you say, I'm going to do a 2 hour, there's going to be hills. And then I'm saying, okay, let's make sure you have a bagel with peanut butter and jam and a banana. And then you're like, and I have 5 minutes to eat. It's like, I'm never going to say eat this much, because it's not going to work.
Mhm.
So it's okay, yes, if we're, let's say, if this is an individual with all the time in the world and they are just devoted to training, let's say as an elite athlete, then yes, you make sure that you are eating with this much time before your session, and then you can do everything perfect. For most people, we don't have that situation. So it means like, okay, if I'm going to be doing a training session at 5 a.m., I will never ask someone, unless that's something they are already doing and feel very comfortable doing, to wake up at 4 a.m. If most people, because running is, let's say, something that you just step out of the door and do in this situation, okay, we have half an hour. Okay, we have half an hour. You're doing this much. It means that ideally we want to have quick carbohydrates. What do I mean by quick? Normally fruit, something with sugar. So, for example, let's say a piece of white bread with jam. That's a really quick carb that is really easy to digest and also use for the energy for the session. So, essentially, in a nutshell, before a training session, ideally we want to prioritize carbohydrate. The more time we have before the session, the more volume we can consume, and the more, let's say, if, for example, this is 1.5 hours or even more time before eating on the session, that's when we can start introducing a bit more protein and fat. So for
Mm,
example, in that case, more, let's say, peanut butter, you can have some yogurt or things like that, just because that helps with the absorption, and it's a little bit, let's say, more energy that is more sustained throughout the effort. But if it's quick, we want something that will quickly go into the system so you can use it straight away. So
y-
yeah, that will be like the summary of it.
yes, and that makes so much sense. And I love, I hate that we do this because I do this too as a coach, but it always depends. And people hate
Mhm.
hearing that answer, but it's so true because not everything is black and white. There's so much gray in between everything in the sense of nutrition and coaching and, you know, races, all that good stuff. It's never this and that. There's a whole bunch of options.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, yes, we try our best, right? To say, like, look, if all you're going to do is listen to this and use it, then I would start here.
Hmm.
But once you start there, it's like, okay, because you are, for example, a banana is a thing that I often recommend because it's easy. Most people understand the size and everything.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like, okay, I'm already eating a banana. Fantastic. Now let's look at what you're doing. And from there, try to improve this in a way that is working even better for you.
Very cool. Yeah, makes so much sense. And it is wild everyone wants that right answer. And it's like, oh, well, I can give you a close answer and hopefully we can work around it and go from it. So very, very cool. All right. Now what is something that you would recommend to eat after a run?
Excellent. So after a run, no, that's good. I like that because now we're looking at, okay, so this is beforehand. Now let's understand what's happening afterwards.
Yep.
Uh, in the fitness space, protein has always been like, as soon as you finish training, you need to have your protein. For runners, it's actually carbohydrate, the thing that we need to prioritize the most. And that is because now we know that first, the carbohydrate, which is like the main fuel, that even if you're, unless you were walking, it's very likely that you were using a lot of carbohydrate as part of that activity, especially if it was a long one. So
Mhm.
replenishing that is important. And I promise that you consume it and your body is going to be like, amazing. We literally just use this fuel. Let's send it to the fuel tank. And that fuel
Mhm.
tank is your glycogen, which means that next training session, you're going to be with that right there in the tank. So carbohydrate is key. And actually, protein is also helpful. Why? Because there was some tissue damage. There was our muscles, let's say, suffer. So essentially, having that protein to support that repair is important. So I do suggest having both. As much as carbohydrate is a priority, if we have them together, is also helpful because I love how wonderful our body is. And actually, if you consume carbohydrate with protein, the carbohydrate helps the protein get absorbed better, and the
Mhm.
protein helps the carbohydrate to absorb better, so they actually help each other.
Very
And it
cool.
means that if we have something like a smoothie, so you have fruit, oat, milk, that is a good thing because you have protein, you have carbs. If you have a sandwich, as in you have, let's say, and I'm going to make it vegetarian so it's easier for people in all spaces. So we have bread, chickpeas, avocado. We have protein from the chickpeas, we have the bread and the avocado because it's tasty. So we have a good recovery thing. So it doesn't have to be complex as, oh, this is the product for recovery.
Mhm.
Now, of course, there are situations if you are, let's say, heading to work and all you have is the opportunity to mix this powder with water, then yes, look for that product that is going to have carbohydrate and protein. But I always promote if we can have the food instead, that's going to be better because it's giving us even more nutrients. There's fiber, there's all many other things that our body in general is taking advantage of beyond the recovery for the run.
Yes, yes, I know that makes so much sense. And I love that protein and carbohydrates work together like that. I had no clue. So look at that. That's awesome. Very cool.
Yeah,
Very cool.
exactly.
Yes. All right. So this is actually the last question, but it's a two-part question. Is
Okay.
everyone the same when it comes to consuming food? And then the second part to that was, do all the diets and or fads work for people?
Mm. So the first, obviously I'll start with the first one, which is like, is everyone the same? No, definitely we're not the same. And the way our body, let's say, of course, absorbs nutrients is different. But the biggest difference between all of us is our circumstances. I can
Mhm.
talk about the most perfect recovery snack, and for some people it's going to be really easy to get that. For someone who has intolerances, it's going to be the worst thing they can have. for someone who is looking after the kids and literally has 3 seconds from training to shifting to mom, essentially,
Mhm.
it's not going to work. So definitely that is key. And that is the biggest challenge. From there, yes, there are different things. For example, for some people, they respond better to higher carbohydrate. Other people are so efficient at using fat that even though they still benefit from some carbohydrate, pushing for so high intake is not as helpful. So that's why that individualized approach is really important, and understanding how the body is responding to things. But I would say that, for example, the things that we have discussed in terms of the carbohydrate beforehand, protein and carbs, and how your body is using at different intensities, that it is the same for most people. Is just at what degree that
Mm.
is that varies a lot. So definitely, and I do acknowledge as well that because of the circumstances, it's not as easy for everybody to just go and hire a dietitian or just work one-on-one with someone. There are definitely different ways to approach this. One is, of course, as much as I know that internet can be extremely overwhelming, my suggestion is like look for example, people who are, and I don't say myself, but like essentially who have the credentials, who have the experience. And if you're going to listen to that, obviously doing it with a critical eye in terms of, all right, I can see that this person is actually someone I could potentially trust. Now I'm going to implement this, but without looking at it as like, oh, this is a way. Let's
Mm.
implement it with curiosity. Let's see how my body is responding. Let's see how I'm feeling, and from there adjusting. If you're going to, let's say, do it on your own, uh, if you have the ability to work with someone, that is amazing. And in my case, I do have, let's say, different tiers of services, so that way, so for people who are, let's say, financially in not the space to be like exclusively working one-on-one, there are other options where it's like, okay, here is a starting point that can be very helpful. So that is that answer. If like, is everyone the same? Not, but to a certain degree, yes.
Yeah.
So in the next one, which is, are all diets the same? Definitely not.
Mm.
And it depends what we're looking at. If we look at diets as the main thing that almost all of them promote, which is weight loss, I would say that at the end of the day, most like what they are doing is a calorie deficit. So whether you're looking at keto, whether you're looking at paleo, where you're looking at intermittent fasting, they are all, at the end of the day, what they are doing, what they are suggesting is different rules that eventually are going to lead you to a calorie deficit, so you lose the weight.
Mm.
So yes, in that way, if that is the objective, very likely they are similar. At the end of the day, for that person, is like, well, this one works better for me because I actually prefer just looking at when I can eat in the case of an intermittent fasting, or actually I'm just happy to not eat carbs and that's it. But if we're looking in this case as, okay, we're talking with runners, we're talking about performance, we're talking about people who are really like very active, then
Mhm.
in that case, most of those diets do not work,
Mm.
because what they are doing is that restriction. And most of them, if we look at that space, is very restrictive of carbohydrate, obviously calories in general, and even to the point of, what are we doing? Like, where did we go with this? If we look at carnivore, for example, where
Mm.
literally everything, and I'm sure that someone is going to come at me if we share this like widely, because like there's quite passionate as well.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
But essentially, what are we looking at carnivore? There is no carbohydrates, there is no fiber because there's no fruit, there's no vegetables. There is an excessive amount of fat and protein from animal sources as well, and it's not helpful from any aspect. It's not helpful from a physiological perspective, because the way our body needs nutrients doesn't match the way we're consuming them if we're following the diet. It's not helpful if we look at the macro level for the environment, in terms of, okay, this resource that now is so limited and is actually causing so much damage, you're telling me that for everybody to eat well, quote unquote eat well, we should be eating 4 times what we're currently doing. That's never
Mm.
going to be sustainable. So it's just definitely not there. So if we are instead, like, in terms of looking for the best diet, the approach is first understanding what do you want, and from there, I would say, even from a weight loss perspective, I don't think any diet that restricts an essential nutrient is going to be sustainable. And that's already getting out of the way carnivore, that's already getting out of the way keto, because carbohydrates are also essential for our body. So it means that, okay, we need to look at, and unfortunately, and I can understand why it's so frustrating for people, because the reason those diets are so popular and easy is because there's a single rule, is just don't eat at this time, just don't eat this food group, just don't eat these things, and that's it. Whereas if we want to do it well, if we want to do it in a sustainable manner, there are no rules, but there are guidelines. There are things that we need to look for. Now, for people who are willing to invest the time and to try it, I promise that that is a way more rewarding journey, that is way more enjoyable, that there's way more flexibility, because you can go on your birthday gathering and say, yes, please pass me a slice of cake, because that's not going against anything. It definitely is something that is worth pursuing. And I hope that if I ever get to write a diet book, essentially, like, it's going to be like, I'll try to make it as simple as possible so people can see that it's actually, once you start understanding how things work and the why behind it, it actually makes it way easier to implement it, because now you know, for example, we talk about carbohydrates. Now you know that if someone is saying only this carbohydrate works, it's not true. There are other 50 options that you can try. If for some reason you're allergic, intolerant, you don't like it, there are more. Or if we're talking about fiber, well, you don't only have to have these fiber supplement, you can get it from these many other foods that on top of that are giving you. So it's enabling that balance. And when we have that, really, like, it's you don't have to be a dietitian to understand this. I'm convinced of that. And I'm seeing, like, with the people I work with, when we work in that framework of, let's see what food can do for you and why it's important, that gives you the power and the control over your food to be using it to your advantage, and in a way that is enjoyable, that works for the whole family. So it is possible, but it is not just, here is this single rule and you just, as long as you don't break this, you're fine.
No, I love that. And I'm sure there's so many things we missed with this in this conversation. And you've said so many helpful, or you've given so much helpful information, and, like, not to say dumbed it down, but made it very easily understandable, which is amazing, because a lot of people, and I'm sure you see this on social media too, they talk about things so kind of far advanced, where your typical normal person might hear it and be like, I have no clue what they said, but they told me not to eat this, so I'm not going to eat this. And like you said, there's no reason why. It's just like a rule. So it's amazing, and all this information is very, very helpful. But is there anything that you can think off the top of your head that we didn't talk about that you want to share on the podcast?
Ooh, not
I'm sure there's
sure.
a
I think,
million.
yeah, definitely there's so many things that obviously we can talk about nutrition, but I would say, not that we didn't talk about, if anything is more reinforcing that part, that whatever you decide to do is starting with a single change, and a single change of, let's try this. Okay, Gaby saying fasted training is not helpful, let's try that banana, let's try that piece of bread, instead of, okay, from now on I'm going to have this and then that. Because the thing is that we want to make it enjoyable, we want to make it sustainable. So if from this podcast you are, I want to try this thing, please do so, and do a single one and see how it goes for you. And once you see that, because even that single change can make a big difference, is, okay, what else can I do? Like, how is this, let's say, philosophy going to work for me in terms of embracing this food as something that can help me, and exploring more. So yeah, that's probably what I would recommend the most.
Very cool, very cool. Well, I will have all of your information, all the links that you have, I will have in the show notes so people can find you and ask questions, or definitely reach out about what you offer as a sense of a dietitian and getting and helping anyone to achieve their diet goals. So I would definitely have you all the links down there below. But a question I like to ask everyone before I let you go on the podcast is, the pod is called the Tribe of Runners. More or less like the ultra community. I've grown to love it. I've fallen in love with how amazing everybody is within it, and how we can just have a conversation and be best of friends afterwards. So with that being said, I know you're very new to the ultra world, so we'll just go more or less like the running world. What no, we'll go even further, the endurance world, because you're triathlon. Yeah, so we'll go with endurance world. What does the word tribe mean to you within that world?
It means, yes, community, but beyond cheerleaders is people who are running right side by side with you. Is knowing that, I mean, if I were to picture it, it's almost like, yes, you're working in, like, let's say in this fine line, but you are like supported by so many individuals who are there for you, who are there to encourage you in the journey, who are there to understand you. uh, it's something that essentially means that you are not alone. Even though we're talking about an individual sport, is just incredible, especially actually with the ultra community. Is just incredible how people are so supportive of each other, and how it doesn't matter if you are the first one crossing that finish line or you are literally the very last one. For every person there, you are incredible and you are a superhuman, regardless of literally how long it took you to get there, which to me is just like, I actually have goosebumps. It's just like, to me, is the favorite part. Is something that is so incredible to see how we can be connected by this very crazy thing,
Yeah.
and find that big community and that ability to go further because we are together.
Yes, I love that. And it's so, so true. I always say this, and it's not dogging on anyone, but the ultra community is just so different, and I love everybody in it, and it's truly been life changing. And I can't wait for you to dive in and become completely obsessed with ultra running like we all are here.
I feel like I'm already there. I just feel like
Yes.
now obsessed from a participant perspective as well. But yeah, no, definitely looking forward to that.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. As I'd mentioned, I'll have all the links in the show notes below. Is there a best way of communication for you that you would like to tell us about?
Yes. So one thing that I want to offer is, because it's absolutely free, I do have a quiz that people can take, and essentially what that does is you answer questions, multiple choice, and at the end it just gives you a score on how well you are, let's say, fueling in different aspects. So that's absolutely for free for people to use. And in terms of getting in touch with me, probably the easiest one for most people is through Instagram. Just send me a DM. If you prefer email, that's also there. I'm sure that that's going to be part of, otherwise, in
Mhm.
my website and everything that's available there. But the thing is that whether how's the issues, like, is, please know that definitely I'm more than happy for people to reach out and ask questions. And if there's something that is like, Gaby, you said this, but I actually don't think that works for me. Do you have alternatives? I'm more than happy to have that conversation.
Well, thank you. I truly appreciate that, and I will have all of this in the show notes for sure. And I love that you have the quiz. I'm gonna have to check it out myself, actually.
Yeah, please do.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, again, thank you so much for being on the pod.
Oh, thank you, Liz. My pleasure.